I don't want her here on the day I'm trying to recover. Frankly, she scares me a bit. I don't know, Mom, she's almost like a psychopath. Sarah's voice was barely audible over the phone, but I could hear the fear and pain in her words. My mother-in-law had just barged into their home, ignoring Sarah's swollen face from the wisdom tooth surgery, and demanded to see my son, who was at the hospital for a kidney stone. She had no regard for anyone else's feelings and only her own. She was a nightmare, and she was about to become my worst enemy. I remember that day vividly, the sky a dull gray, mirroring my mood as I mulled over the recent call from my daughter-in-law. She sounded exhausted, her voice a mere whisper, burdened with the weight of recent events. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in front of me as I replayed her words in my head. It was like she was on a mission, you know? Sarah had said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Your mother-in-law just stormed in here like a hurricane. I couldn't even get up to stop her, what with my jaw aching from the wisdom tooth surgery. I sighed, rubbing my temples. This wasn't the first time my mother-in-law, whom I'll call Mrs. H, had overstepped boundaries, but this was certainly one of her more dramatic exploits. Knowing her, she must have heard the message about my son, David, passing a kidney stone and needing surgery, and decided it was her cue to play the hero. She didn't even knock, just burst in and started calling out for David, Sarah continued, her voice a mixture of pain and frustration. I tried to tell her he wasn't here, that he was at the hospital, but she barely listened. She just kept pacing around, wringing her hands, making it all about her worry, completely ignoring my state. I remembered nodding, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. I'm so sorry, Sarah. She can be overwhelming. There was a pause, and then Sarah's voice lower. I don't want her here on the day I'm trying to recover. Frankly, she scares me a bit. I don't know, Mom, she's almost like a psychopath. The word had hit me hard. Psychopath wasn't a term thrown around lightly in our family. Yet, in that moment, reflecting on Mrs. H's history of disregard for others' feelings, it didn't seem too far-fetched. As I hung up the phone, I felt a knot of worry in my stomach. Mrs. H's actions were escalating, and now she was affecting not just me, but my son and his wife. I wondered how many more of these missions we'd have to endure before something gave way. I took a sip of my now cold coffee, its bitterness somehow fitting. I needed to do something, but what? Mrs. H was a force of nature, seemingly impervious to reason or empathy. As I stared out the window at the drab day, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of a series of unwelcome visits, and I needed to brace myself for what was to come. The next day, I decided to visit Sarah. As I walked up the path to their home, I could see the curtains twitching slightly. Sarah opened the door, her face swollen on one side from the surgery, but she managed a weak smile. Hi, Mom, she greeted me, stepping aside to let me in. The house was quiet, the usual chaos of kids and daily life subdued. I followed Sarah into the living room, where she eased herself onto the couch with a sigh. I really appreciate you coming over, she said, her voice still soft and strained. I took a seat opposite her. Of course, Sarah. I wanted to check on you, and, well, talk about yesterday. She nodded, her eyes downcast. I just don't understand her, your mother-in-law. It's like she completely disregards anyone else's feelings. I nodded, understanding her frustration. She's always been like that, unfortunately. It's her way or no way. She doesn't see how her actions affect others. Sarah looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and anger. It's not just that. When she was here, she acted like my surgery was nothing compared to David's situation. I mean, I know kidney stones are serious, but I was in pain too. That's just like her, I said, my voice laced with bitterness. She has a way of making everything about herself. Sarah leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. And then, the way she spoke about the kids' lunch, it was so petty, asking if I had chicken nuggets and fries in the freezer, and then ranting about not buying them lunch because it's too expensive. She knows we're trying to save money with the baby coming. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. She's wealthy enough to help, but she chooses not to. It's her way of maintaining control, I think. The conversation shifted as we discussed strategies to handle Mrs. H's behavior. We agreed that setting boundaries was essential, though we both knew it would be challenging. As I left their house that day, my heart was heavy. I knew that this situation with Mrs. H was far from over. It was affecting my family deeply, and the thought of what lay ahead was daunting. But I also felt a sense of resolve. Sarah and David needed my support, and I was determined to be there for them no matter what Mrs. H threw our way. A few days later, I found myself sitting across from my son David in a quaint cafe downtown. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes speaking volumes about his recent ordeal. As he stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, I couldn't help but notice the subtle grimace of pain he tried to hide. "Mom," he began, his voice low, "I don't know what to do about Grandma. She's just too much." I sighed, taking a sip of my tea. "I know, David. I heard about her visit from Sarah, how she completely ignored Sarah's condition and made everything about you and your kidney stone." David nodded, a frown creasing his forehead. "Yeah, and it's not just that. When she found out we were getting groceries delivered, she had the audacity to ask Sarah what was wrong with her legs that she couldn't shop herself. Can you believe that?" I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "That's terrible, especially considering Sarah is pregnant and needs to rest. Your grandmother can be incredibly insensitive." David leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to the window. "And then she lied about you, said you were too busy to come with her to see us. I knew that wasn't like you, Mom." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "I would never say that, David. You and Sarah are my priority. I know how hard kidney stones can be, and I wanted to respect your need for privacy and rest. I even tried to stop her from going over." He squeezed my hand, a small smile appearing on his face. "I know, Mom, and we appreciate that. It's just hard dealing with Grandma's antics." The conversation turned to how we could manage Mrs. H's behavior in the future. We discussed the importance of setting boundaries and being united as a family in our approach. David agreed, though I could see the apprehension in his eyes. Confronting Mrs. H was no small feat. As we parted ways, I felt a renewed sense of determination. My family was being torn apart by Mrs. H's actions, and it was up to me to help mend the rifts. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to stand up to her, for the sake of my son and his growing family. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was resolved to see it through. A week had passed since my conversation with David, and the tension within the family was palpable. I found myself sitting in my living room, the television on but unwatched, lost in thought. My phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. It was a message from Sarah asking if we could talk. I immediately called her. "Hey, Sarah, what's up?" I asked, trying to sound calm despite the worry knotting in my stomach. "It's about Mrs. H again," she said, her voice strained. "She's been telling people in the family that you refused to visit us because you were too busy, that you didn't care about David's condition." I felt a surge of anger. "That's a blatant lie. I never said that. I care deeply about you both. You know that, right?" Sarah sighed. "I know, Mom. It's just frustrating. It feels like she's trying to turn the family against you." We talked at length about the situation. I reassured Sarah that I would handle Mrs. H and set the record straight. It was clear that Mrs. H's manipulative behavior was escalating, and I knew I had to confront her. The next day, I found myself at Mrs. H's doorstep, my heart racing but my resolve firm. She answered the door with a fake smile, which faltered when she saw the seriousness in my expression. "Can we talk?" I asked, not waiting for an invitation. Once inside, I confronted her about the lies she had been spreading. "Why are you telling people I didn't want to visit David and Sarah? You know that's not true." Mrs. H's expression turned defensive. "Well, you didn't come with me, did you? You always find excuses not to be involved." "That's not fair," I countered. "I respect David and Sarah's privacy and needs. Spreading lies about me is not helping anyone." The conversation grew heated, with Mrs. H trying to justify her actions and me trying to make her see the damage she was causing. It was clear that she was unwilling to acknowledge her role in the family's growing discord. As I left her house, I felt a mix of frustration and sadness. It was apparent that Mrs. H was not going to change easily. However, I was more determined than ever to protect my family from her toxic influence. It was going to be a tough journey, but one I was prepared to take for the sake of my son and his family. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew that standing up to Mrs. H was the first step towards healing the rift she had created. The confrontation with Mrs. H left me emotionally drained, but I knew the battle was far from over. The following day, as I was trying to immerse myself in gardening to clear my mind, my phone began buzzing incessantly. It was Mrs. H sending one text after another in rapid succession. I took a deep breath before checking the messages, bracing myself for what I might find. True to form, Mrs. H was in a state of near panic, her texts a flurry of concern and exasperation. "Your son won't answer his phone. He needs to rest, not work. Can't you talk some sense into him?" one message read. Another followed quickly. "It's not right, him working while he's sick. You should convince him to stay home." I felt a twinge of frustration. David was an adult, capable of making his own decisions, especially about his health and work. Mrs. H's insistence on meddling was not only unwarranted but also intrusive. I replied calmly, trying to maintain a sense of diplomacy. "David is aware of his condition and can decide for himself. I trust his judgment." But the texts kept coming, each more insistent than the last. Mrs. H seemed incapable of understanding the concept of boundaries or the fact that David was not a child to be coddled. As I sat there, phone in hand, a realization dawned on me. Mrs. H's incessant texting was more than just concern. It was her way of exerting control, of inserting herself into every aspect of our lives. It was suffocating. I decided then and there to set a firm boundary. I responded with a final text. "I respect David's decisions as an adult. Please respect our wishes for space and autonomy." The rest of the day was spent in a tense silence, my phone mercifully quiet. I knew this was just a temporary reprieve, but it was a start. Mrs. H needed to understand that her behavior was not only unwelcome but also harmful. As I turned in for the night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of apprehension about what the next day might bring. Dealing with Mrs. H was like navigating a minefield, but for my family's sake, I was willing to tread carefully and stand firm. The journey was far from over, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the following days, a tense quietude settled over our family. My conversations with David and Sarah became more about how to handle Mrs. H's overbearing nature than about their day-to-day lives. It was during one such conversation over a cup of tea at their house that Sarah brought up a significant point. "You know, both David and I have stopped answering her calls," she said, her voice a mix of defiance and weariness. "It's the only way we feel we can get some peace." I nodded, understanding their need for this silent stand. "It's a tough decision, but sometimes silence is the strongest message you can send." David, who had been quietly listening, added, "It's just, we need this time, especially with the baby coming. We can't have this constant stress." I reached across the table, squeezing Sarah's hand. "I support you both, and I'll continue to make it clear to her that this behavior is unacceptable." That evening, as I sat in my living room, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on me. Mrs. H's refusal to respect boundaries was straining our family ties. Yet, in this stand of silence, there was a glimmer of unity and strength. We were all in agreement that something had to change. A few days later, Mrs. H attempted to reach out to me again, her tone a mix of frustration and guilt-tripping. "I don't understand why everyone is avoiding me. I'm just trying to help," she texted. I took a moment before replying, choosing my words carefully. "We appreciate your concern, but we all need space. Respect and understanding go both ways." Her response was quick, a flurry of messages trying to justify her actions. But this time I did not engage further. It was clear that our silent stand needed to be upheld, at least until she was ready to have a constructive and respectful conversation. The days turned into weeks, and the quiet stand continued. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. In this silence, there was a sense of solidarity among us, a shared understanding that we were doing what was best for our family's well-being. As I lay in bed each night, I thought about the future, about how we would eventually need to bridge this gap with Mrs. H. But for now, this silent stand was our shield, a necessary barrier to protect the peace and sanity of our family. It was a difficult path, but one we were all committed to walking together. The silent stand with Mrs. H had stretched over a month, and its impact was palpable. It had given David and Sarah the much-needed respite to focus on their health and prepare for their new baby. For me, it had been a period of reflection and contemplation about the future dynamics of our family. One sunny afternoon, I invited David and Sarah for lunch at my home. The purpose was clear, to discuss how we could move forward with Mrs. H. As we sat around the dining table, the conversation gradually shifted from casual chatter to the matter at hand. "Mom, we can't go on like this forever," David said, breaking the ice. "We need to find a way to deal with Grandma that doesn't leave us constantly stressed out." Sarah nodded in agreement. "She's going to be a great-grandmother soon. We can't just cut her out entirely, but things can't go back to how they were either." I took a deep breath, acknowledging the truth in their words. We need to set clear boundaries with her, boundaries that she understands and respects, and we need to be united in this. We discussed various strategies like setting specific times for her to visit and call, and making it clear that unannounced visits were not acceptable. We also agreed on the importance of open communication, ensuring that Mrs. H. understood the impact of her actions. The conversation wasn't easy. It brought up past grievances and frustrations, but it was necessary. We all understood that the path forward required effort and patience from each of us. As the meeting drew to a close, David brought up a crucial point. "We need to have a sit-down with Grandma and lay all this out. It's the only way she might understand." I nodded, feeling a mix of apprehension and hope. "I agree. It's time to have that conversation." The next few days were spent in preparation. We outlined what we wanted to say, ensuring we were on the same page. Finally, the day arrived to meet with Mrs. H. We chose a neutral location, a quiet park, hoping the open environment would lend a calm atmosphere to the discussion. Sitting on a park bench, we waited for Mrs. H. When she arrived, her initial confusion at the setting soon gave way to realization as we began to talk. The conversation was difficult, with moments of tension and emotion. We expressed our concerns and laid out the boundaries we expected her to respect. Mrs. H. listened, sometimes defensively, but as we continued, I could see a flicker of understanding in her eyes. As we parted ways, there was no definitive resolution, but there was a start, a foundation we could build upon. The path forward wouldn't be easy. It would require effort, understanding, and forgiveness from all sides. But for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of hope, a belief that our family could move beyond the drama and find a way to coexist in harmony.